Israel Adesanya, arguably the greatest middleweight in UFC history. The Last Stylebender was doing laps of the division before an epic rivalry with Alex Pereira culminated in him beating his old foe. However, a dominant performance by Sean Strickland saw Adesanya lose his middleweight title, which gave rise to a new era of challengers. Out of this came Dricus du Plessis, a South African high-pressure, high-volume fighter that defeated Strickland to win middleweight gold. This month we'll be seeing Adesanya going head-to-head with du Plessis. We know the backstory to this fight, and in this video I'm not going to be going into the beef. Instead, we're going to look at strategy and ways in which both fighters can win and lose. On paper, this could look like a dream matchup for Adesanya. Dricus has heavy feet, he blitzes in with his hands down, and we know that the check hook is a natural counter to a blitz, and the check hook happens to be one of Adesanya's best weapons. These are some examples of Dricus' reckless blitzes. You can see him getting caught coming in, but he just overwhelmed his opponent in this fight to get the finish. However, we've seen these tactics go through the middleweight division. Could he get away with this with a fighter like Adesanya? I don't think so. Take a look at the Robert Whittaker fight. Whittaker used similar blitzes, albeit they were more calculated, and generally he was more defensively sound. However, as you can see here, he did get caught with Adesanya's trademark left hook. At the same time, look at where Adesanya throws the hook from. It comes from a very low position, and Adesanya actually gets caught by a big shot from Robert Whittaker at the same time. Whilst the check left hook happens to be one of Adesanya's best weapons, it also happens to leave his biggest opening. And this is one that we saw Sean Strickland exploit in their fight. Is it possible that Dricus uses the Sean Strickland blueprint to beat Adesanya? Sean Strickland's performance against Adesanya was nothing short of magical. He was a huge underdog on the night, but he felt like the mature defending champion, completely smothering the work of Adesanya and just not allowing him to get his shots off. What's more is that he actually dropped Adesanya whilst Izzy was throwing a left hook. Dricus actually made a comment on this shot.
He put him down. I honestly thought the fight was going to be over, but yeah, if I catch him with that shot, it's over.
We'll come to Dricus' size later, but I think he could have a point here. We've seen that when Dricus hits fighters, they get knocked down or knocked out, whereas the same can't be said for Sean Strickland. Strickland's much more of a volume fighter, throwing at 70% rather than going for knockout shots every time. So what did Strickland do to completely negate Adesanya's offense? There are two key things which Dricus would need to think of. Firstly, it's the cardio. Sean Strickland was able to keep up this pace for 25 minutes. Can you expect the same from du Plessis? We've seen Dricus tire in fights before. Don't get me wrong, we have seen big improvements in his cardio, especially in the Sean Strickland fight. However, at the end of the 25 minutes, Strickland was the one maintaining his shape, and Dricus was noticeably more tired. With that being said, I don't think Dricus could maintain the same kind of pressure that Strickland did against Adesanya. Alongside this is the discipline. I'm not talking about training discipline, I understand how hard Dricus trains. However, it's discipline in the fight not to leave yourself exposed, to move forward with calculated pressure. And as we touched upon before, Dricus does not do this. His blitzes see his footwork coming all over the place, his chin up in the air, and his arms by his side. Again, when it comes to discipline, we did see a more disciplined approach in the fight between Sean Strickland and Dricus. However, Dricus saw his best success when he did take a risk, and he was less disciplined. Similar to Izzy's left hook, Dricus' lack of discipline is actually his biggest asset and his biggest vulnerability. It would take a massive restructure of Dricus' typical game plan to see him follow the Sean Strickland blueprint. Stranger things have happened, but I think this is going to be a very different fight to Adesanya versus Strickland. Bearing in mind, Dricus said that if he'd caught Adesanya with the same shot that Strickland did, that Adesanya wouldn't have got back up. This leads us nicely into the discussion about size.
I do believe Darren Till has everything that it takes to be a champion, but not at middleweight.
I really remember this clip of Dricus talking about Darren Till. It was the casual dismissal of Darren Till as a welterweight moving up in weight classes that made me think that Dricus had this. He clearly has massive confidence in his weight, and he is a big middleweight. We saw the Adesanya experiment when he moved up to light heavyweight, and he did look small compared to Jan Blachowicz. Although Dricus is shorter than Adesanya, he looks like the man who could naturally move up the weight class better. He's got that thick build, very powerful, and if you're looking purely at raw strength, I think you'd have to give the edge to Dricus. Remember, this is the man who dropped Robert Whittaker with a jab. So in terms of raw strength, as I said, you've got to give it to Dricus, but remember, reach is also a factor when it comes to size. and Adesanya has a 4-inch reach advantage. Whilst well-timed and calculated blitzes negate the reach advantage, this is something that we've not really seen from Dricus so far. His blitzes are really explosive, but they're not the most calculated, and he does rely on taking a shot to give 2 back. So I think we can establish that if Dricus does rely on his typical blitzes, he's most likely to get caught by Adesanya. If he can be more calculated with his pressure over the course of 25 minutes, we could see him wear Adesanya down, but I'm not sure that'll be the case. However, this is mixed martial arts, not kickboxing, so could wrestling play a part in this fight? Dricus has solid wrestling and top pressure. We saw him dismantle Darren Till with a combination of good wrestling and dominant ground game. However, the condition of this Darren Till was questionable, so I'm not sure how much there is you can take away from this performance. At the same time, Adesanya's wrestling defence has been stellar since joining the UFC. It was only his fight against Jan Blachowicz, a weight class up, where we saw his wrestling weakness get exploited. He's really good at staying on his feet, and Dricus will really have to work to get the takedowns. However, if he gets a takedown early, then whilst both fighters are dry, Dricus could establish some dominance and take the first 2 rounds. This would mean that Izzy's playing catch up. Could we see a similar performance to Bilal Muhammad against Leon Edwards? I'm not sure. I don't think Dricus' cardio will hold up to that level. So let's recap what we've spoken about so far. We know that Izzy's check hook could be the kryptonite to Dricus' unorthodox blitzes. At the same time, if Dricus is disciplined, applies that pressure, mixes up his wrestling, he could have a very similar performance to Sean Strickland against Adesanya. But ultimately, are we expecting the same Adesanya? This all depends on how much he took from the Strickland fight. Was it just a bad night for Israel Adesanya, or was it a sign of things to come? Adesanya is 35 now, and age is definitely on the side of Dricus. However, this is the man who came back against Alex Pereira to win back the middleweight title. He came through that epic war against Kelvin Gastelum to lift the interim title all those years ago. And I can see him outpointing Dricus in a long and grueling 25-minute battle. I think that Adesanya will get caught. I think there'll be some sketchy moments where he doesn't necessarily trust his chin. However, I think it will just be too exhausting for Dricus to keep following Adesanya. I think he'll move round, picking him off on the back foot, and Israel Adesanya will once again be the middleweight champion of the world.